Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is calling for Congresswoman Ilhan Omar to be deported back to Somalia after a new video emerged, her seeming to claim that her primary job in Congress is to protect Somali interests. Here's some of that clip.
dad badan ay soo wacay oo waxay leeyihiin Ilhan dawladda Mareykanka inaan la hadashid waaye dawladda Mareykanka maxay ka qabanaysaa jawaabteedu waxay ahayd dawladda Mareykanka waxay ka qabanaysaa wixii annaga aan dhahno dawladda Mareykanka qabo waa kalsoonidaas inaan isku qabno annaga Soomaali hadii aan nahay wadankan annaga ku nool wadankan wadankii aan annaga tax ka dhiibno waaye waa wadankii gabar idinka dhalatayne ee Congress-ka fadhiso intii aniga aan Congress joogo wadanka Soomaaliya biyaheeda dad kaleeta iyo badeeda dad kale ma qaadanayaan.
DeSantis reposted the video on his personal account along with the caption, "Expel from Congress, denaturalize, and deport." DeSantis wasn't alone in condemning Omar's rhetoric. Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Somaliland, Rhoda J. Elmi, reposted the video as well, writing, quote, "Specifically troubling were her endeavors to revive the once violent and dangerous ideology of Greater Somalia, which caused so much death, destruction, and conflict in the Horn of Africa."
But some saw some issues with the calls to punish, even deport American citizen Omar over her supposedly treasonous ties to other countries. The right-leaning American Spectator published an article claiming that the video's translation was being distorted for political ends. From the Spectator, and a Somali analyst with the Heritage Institute for Policy Studies told me on X that Omar's words were being distorted to push an agenda. Similarly, Faisal Ali from The Guardian told me she didn't threaten to invade Somalia's neighbors. She didn't say she was Somali first and Muslim second. At the same time, dozens of self-labeled Somalia analysts, some flashing their credentials, got stuck in the online onslaught, spreading their own translations. Others called out the seeming hypocrisy of denouncing Omar for her pro-Somalia comments while remaining mute on the topic of rabidly pro-Israel members of Congress. One ex-commenter posted, quote, "Yeah, Ilhan Omar should be deported along with every member of Congress," like this, alongside a picture of Burgess Owens' congressional office with massive pro-Israel signage all around it. Yeah, this is a really interesting time to say, if you say that you have solidarity with a country overseas and you want its borders to be protected and not invaded and have anybody else's territorial expansion, that gets you deported, but only if you're Ilhan Omar and not if you're the overwhelming bipartisan majority of Congress, who's basically said, we don't want to even have an investigation into whether or not Israel is doing any war crimes because we're so committed to Israeli sovereignty. And in fact, saying anything that might even have the implication that you think Israel as a Jewish state shouldn't persist is de facto anti-Semitic, and we're going to pass a resolution that makes that case under law. I mean, that's what the other side, that is what our government is actually doing, right, with respect to Israel. Ilhan Omar says in that statement, when Somalian leader says, what are you going to do for Somalia, to say, I represent the Somalian Americans, and the Somalian Americans are going to advocate for what they want, like all Americans do at Congress. It's just such a stretch. I don't get it. What do you make of it?
I mean, I don't know if it's a stretch. I understand people. Well, okay, first of all, she can't be denaturalized or deported or any of that. She has First Amendment rights. The way to hold her accountable if you don't like what she has to say is run against her and defeat her. She has to be held accountable through the political process. I would be fine with that happening. I can't speak to whether there are translation errors here, but I understand
even if there weren't,
why.
I was struggling with it. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I understand people saying, a member of Congress saying their first loyalty is to Somalia or Somalians and then to Islam, and then I'm not even mentioning America as a third thing. That was what many conservatives were objecting to. But it also, and this is the difference between me and the vast explicitly pro-Israel people out there, I also find it a little odd that Israel's priorities seem more important than America's to members of Congress, that there's no shortage of money to be found for foreign wars and support for Israel's security and very little to be found at home. So that, I'm similarly annoyed by that. Frankly, I can't understand if you're I don't know, like, you should be you should have some pride in the country you're in, that you're representing as a member of Congress. Like, if you don't think that, I don't know what you're doing. I'm not specifically saying that to her, just all of them.
Well, John Fetterman's gotten big plaudits from many of the same people who are criticizing Ilhan Omar after he wrapped himself quite literally in an Israeli flag on several occasions, most recently standing on the roof of what was his offices, and responding
That's because
during
it's enjoyable to watch him fight with activists.
Sure. Literally wrapped himself on multiple occasions in an Israeli flag. Joe Biden recently, after October 7th, said during a press conference, quote, "If Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it." Hakeem Jeffries has referred to Jerusalem as the sixth borough of New York. And we have an interesting quote for an old Nancy Pelosi appearance that was also going around that goes to how committed establishment politicians on both sides of the aisle are to Israel, perhaps even over U.S. interests. Let's take a look at that.
According to one study that I have seen, 70% of people in our country, Jewish people in our country, voted Democratic in this election. So that is a very important point in terms of our connection. I have said to people when they ask me, if this Capitol crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment to our aid. And I don't even call it aid, our cooperation.
Yeah, I wish our government thought that, like, if the Capitol were to crumble to the ground, our one priority would be, I don't know, continuing to fund our own security or our own infrastructure or something like that, or our own healthcare system.
Aid to Israel.
It would be
modern, developed,
the money
affluent
overseas.
Country that we give more money to than any other country in the world, including Somalia, which is impoverished and has humanitarian needs, gets, of course, less money in U.S. funding.
Yes, I wish all of our
Israel.
Political figures would read the room a little bit better, read the room being the broader nation at large. The reason why there's a lot of the America First sentiment thriving on the right and not just on the right is that U.S. government officials for too long have been negligent when it comes to what's going on at home and are easy to find money for every other government under the sun, a friendly nation, supposedly. I don't even know what we're getting out of it. Frankly, it seems like we're getting less safe as a result. And that makes a lot of people very angry. It's given rise to political figures like Donald Trump and others on the right, and probably some on the left as well, trying to reorient the priorities of the federal government in a more inward direction, and the elites keep missing it.
Yeah, I think another part of the story that shouldn't go uncommented upon is the threat to deport her, an American citizen and sitting congresswoman. It's hard to imagine that kind of threat would have been made against someone who was not, one, a recent immigrant, and two, also Black and Muslim. And you know, it is interesting. Ron DeSantis is making these charges. He's someone who framed his campaign as a war on woke and really put a target on a lot of these kinds of cultural issues. He seems to be doubling down on that, despite it not being especially successful for him in the, at least, national political realm. I don't know that making these kind of charges against elected officials, saying that you want to deport someone because you disagree with them, when you have never said anything like that about any number of other political actors, it's going to continue to reflect poorly on the party.
Well,
and really affirm people's expectations that they're not exactly hospitable to folks with any kind of diversity, including recent immigrants of any color.
Well, I think he was reacting to what seemed to be a professed loyalty to Somalia over the government she's an ostensible representative of.
So you can imagine that he would say you should deport John Fetterman for wrapping himself in an Israeli flag, or deport Nancy Pelosi
for saying... can't deport any of these people.
Exactly, but somehow it seems
well, he's allowed to say that.
Yeah, and I'm saying that I think the obvious implication
just like she's allowed to say it.
I think the obvious implication is that somehow Ilhan Omar is more deportable than some of these other people, and that's why folks are calling it out as bigoted.
Yeah, I mean, she could be... I just read this Newsweek article about it. She could be forced to register as a foreign. I mean, that's going on with Menendez right now.
Right, and
Lobby, who's a good example of someone who has put foreign governments' interests ahead of the U.S. in a criminal and corrupt and chargeable way, one that Democrats and Republicans recognize is a major scandal that he has been, and doing it, it's seemingly not for ideological, I mean, maybe it's for ideological reasons as well, but also just for personal enrichment.
Yeah, but the big story here is really how AIPAC has managed, unlike all these other foreign lobbying groups, not to have to register as a foreign agent the way that any other country's lobbying group has. And the history of all of this is fascinating. I've been reading John Mearsheimer's history of AIPAC in the United States, and it is incredible how differently it is treated than other national interest groups. And it is remarkable that, again, Ilhan Omar continues to be the target of all of these kinds of attacks precisely because she has historically been willing to criticize AIPAC.
No, I don't know that it's remarkable, but there's too much of it. More rising right after this.